I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Vladimir Putin is everywhere right now, especially places he shouldn't be, like every single one of our social media feeds, or the country of Ukraine. The former is just a nuisance. The latter, well, that's an atrocity. The thing about Putin is that for about as long as he's been in the public eye, he's been a closed book, and purposefully so. I mean, what do you think they taught him up there in KGB school? After joining Russian President Boris Yeltsin's administration in 1998, Vladimir would become prime minister the very next year before extending his appetite for power to the presidency as well. Now, Putin is once more testing every person on this planet, especially Russia's neighbor to the west, Ukraine, with a totally unprovoked and unnecessary ground war. Putin certainly tries his damnedest to give off the impression of being unshakably strong, but did you know that some theorists believe that he's suffering from a birth defect? Well, if you want to know more about this man, then stay tuned for the story of Vladimir Putin here for you on Famous Life. Vladimir Putin was born on October 7, 1952 in what was once known as the city of Leningrad in the USSR. Of course, these days that city now just goes by the name of St. Petersburg, and the country has returned to calling itself Russia. At the time of his birth, Putin was the unremarkable child of a totally nondescript and average working-class family. In fact, if you were to look up the definition of an average-looking Russian man, Putin would fit nicely into every category thanks to his non-exemplary physical stature and his willingness to simply fade into the background, especially early on in his life. A former associate of Putin's who knew him in the early 90s once described him to British journalist Ben Judah in the following way. He was absolutely average man, his voice was average, not tough, not high, he had an average personality, average intelligence, not especially high intelligence. You could go out the door and find thousands of people in Russia, all of them just like Putin. According to movement analysis expert Brenda L. Connors, who has studied Putin's movements intensely, she believes that he likely suffers from a debilitating and congenital neurological deficiency that was most likely caused by a stroke that would have happened to him in utero. Brenda believes that it was a direct result of this stroke that would prevent Putin from using the right side of his body, which is why whenever you see him walk, his left arm swings much more than his right. Digging further into her hypothesis, Brenda, well, she would suggest that it's unlikely Putin ever even learned to crawl as a baby. Rather, it's far more likely he learned to move with his entire body in a head-to-tail pattern similar to a fish or reptile. Putin began to serve for his country for the first time by joining the KGB, the Soviet-era counterpart to the CIA. He worked there from the day that he graduated Leningrad State University in 1974 until the early stages of 1991, and his time there wasn't just spent working, he also learned a great deal. As a student at the higher school of the KGB, Putin attended university-level courses designed to teach pupils the ins and outs of the spy trade in vivid detail, especially the power of subversion and manipulation. And while Putin's ties with the KGB officially ended in the early 90s, it's quite likely that he continued to keep close ties with his former associates throughout the rest of his career. During his time at the KGB Academy, Putin would meet a flight attendant named Ludmila, and they would marry soon after in 1983. Over the course of their marriage, they would have two daughters, Maria and Katerina. Putin and his wife would eventually divorce in 2013. I'm not sure what happened between the two of them, and with the iron grip Putin keeps on the Russian media, I kinda doubt anyone else knows either. But there are also rumors that Putin might have fathered another child with former Russian gymnastics champion Alina Kaboyava. Anyhow, by 1994, Putin had become the deputy mayor of the city his birth, and 4 years after that, he'd be named director of the FSB, which was the KGB's domestic successor. Then things began happening really fast. So fast that it's almost suspicious. In 1999, Putin was named Prime Minister of Russia. The following year, he'd become the most powerful person in the country when he was elected president. Putin has remained in power ever since. By all accounts, Putin's early years as the Russian president didn't exactly paint him as a colossus. He was easily impressed by the might of the American empire, and awed of, by all people, George Bush. Putin was also perceptive of how limited his domestic power was. For decades, Russian power had been wielded by barrel-chested generals who would cut their teeth as brilliant strategists. Putin was about as far away from that as you can get. 2003 would become a turning point in his career. That's when he finally worked up the nerve to outwardly abuse his political power for the first time and arrest Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the country's richest man. After he got away with that, With barely a word spoken from the media and no uprise from the people, Putin began to test the limits of his power even further. Before long, he discovered that there weren't any. On October 7, 2006, otherwise known as Putin's 54th birthday, a Russian journalist named Anna Politkovskaya, who had exposed the corruption of the Russian army and its conduct in Chechnya, was shot to death in her apartment building. Afterwards, Putin would be accused by international media outlets for not doing enough to protect the country's independent media. For his own part, Putin would simply concentrate on the fact that her death caused the government more problems than her investigations ever did, which should give you a taste of how truly empathetic he is. According to the Russian constitution at the time, Putin was barred from serving a third term as president. So after his second term was up, first deputy prime minister Dmitry Medvedev was elected as his successor in 2008. Only one day later, Putin was appointed Prime Minister of Russia once again, maintaining his political power. 3 years later, Medvedev would make the unprecedented and probably totally uncoerced move to propose that Putin be offered the chance to run for president in 2012. Putin graciously accepted. When he won the presidency again, Russia would see the largest protest in Moscow history since the early 90s, marching through the city's streets. Putin simply waited the protesters out, then picked off the leaders one by one with secretly videotaped provocations and phony criminal charges. For the next decade, Putin would continue to consolidate his grip of power of Russia by transforming its courts, media, and other government institutions to serve the needs of himself and himself alone. He's not only spent a ton on military advancements, he's also banned or jailed near anyone who's had the strength of character to oppose him politically, or the bravery to investigate him as a journalist. He's even officially changed Russia's constitution so that he could theoretically remain in power till at least 2036. Because of this political longevity, Putin has seen 5 US presidents come and go. According to most reports, the only individual with even a hope of rivaling Putin as a politician is Alexei Navalny, a Moscow-based digital populist whom, surprise, surprise, the Kremlin has put under various arrests. But without a doubt, Putin's most horrendous crimes are those he's committed on human rights against other nations, the wars he's launched in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Crimea, and most recently, the Ukraine. Ukraine has aspired to join the NATO military alliance for years now, seeking to lean towards the democracies of the European Union after establishing itself as a nation in the wake of the USSR's dissolution in the early 90s. Ever since then, Ukraine has understandably looked to cement itself in its own cultural and ideological destiny. The only problem is Vladimir Putin isn't willing to allow them the opportunity to do so. Not only does Putin not want Ukraine within 3 feet of any NATO alliance, he's not even willing to give them the respect of autonomy. As far as he's concerned, the Ukraine is an illegitimate country that exists on land that is historically Russian. For close to a decade, Putin and his government have supported separatist rebels in Ukraine's Donbass region, and then, over the past weeks, he escalated things a whole lot further, invading the country itself. This unprovoked attack on a peaceful nation has the entire world in an uproar and wondering what Putin is thinking. In fact, even inside of his very own country, 62% of Russians are worried that their world leader is about to kick off World War III, according to a survey taken by the Levada Center. Look, how this winds up is simply too far beyond the scope of our series, but the hope is that Putin comes to his senses sooner than later. Then again, if the history is anything to go by, that's unlikely to happen. So here's to hoping that before things escalate totally out of control, that Putin suffers a stroke like the one that might have started in the womb. Thanks for checking out this video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and leave a comment for who you'd like us to feature next.